There is a dark side to each one of us where our forbidden fear, lust, and anger lurk. These unconscious desires do not rest quietly in the human psyche. They are, in a sense, our enemy within. One man believed he could exorcise our demons through the study of dreams. Sigmund Freud took pride in disturbing the sleep of humanity. At the turn of the century in Vienna, Austria, Dr. Sigmund Freud claimed he had discovered a new doorway to the unconscious.
So, tell me anything that comes into your mind. Perhaps we could begin with your dream last night.
As a child, I had a recurring nightmare of falling down what seemed to be an endless well.
Drive for miles and miles down this tunnel.
When suddenly we're attacked by a sea creature. Turns out to be a giant octopus.
And I may have been invisible at the time.
There's a man in front of her with a snake. I can see the teeth of the snake.
Out from the tunnel, out onto the deck of a sailboat.
Chases me through the ship, and eventually I come to a door behind which I know the octopus is waiting for me.
I woke up before I reached the bottom.
I shall bring forward proof that there is a psychological technique which makes it possible to interpret dreams.
Freud's self-proclaimed masterpiece, The Interpretation of Dreams, offered readers a window into our most secret selves. In his revolutionary work, Freud suggested that often the purpose of dreams is to satisfy through fantasy the instinctive urges that society judges unacceptable. The laws of logic that rule our waking world do not apply to the kingdom of sleep, where we are free to experience fantastic adventures. For Freud, this liberation of fantasy was a path that led to the heart of the unconscious. He promised us a profoundly deeper understanding of the human condition.
This was a dream I had just a couple of weeks ago, which took place on a canal boat, and the guy who was piloting the boat I knew was a nutcase, yet I got on the boat with him anyway. And at some point during the journey, he attacked me. And I had to defend myself, and I ended up killing him. But the sensation the dream left me with when I woke up was a very clear sense of what it was like to actually stick a knife into somebody and to end their life.
Ever since Freud first declared his groundbreaking views about the mind and its operation, opinion about him has been bitterly divided. He has become the psychiatrist everybody loves to hate.
Freud was really a bold and daring thinker who loved wild hypotheses, and then, more or less on the guinea pig model, tried to induce the evidence to confirm his theories in the persons of his various patients on the couch. So we have here a picture of Freud as a grand theorist, a very reckless thinker, really.
Oh, if he weren't a revolutionary creative thinker, and if he weren't right in so many areas, he wouldn't be criticized for where he's been wrong. There are, dozens of psychologists who were very largely wrong, about whom we say nothing because they really have not shaped our society.
Whatever your opinion, Freud is inescapable. His terminology and his ideas pervade contemporary life. He taught us to pay attention to feelings and actions that we once thought meaningless, provoking a confrontation with our more primitive selves. After Freud, it was not so easy to avoid responsibility for unconscious behavior.
What Freud did was to build a whole system of interpretation aimed at exposing the real meaning for an act that seemed to have no meaning at all. Something that seemed to come just from our bodies, just out of habit, something that we didn't pay attention to. Freud found in that the key to what we might really be desiring. And whether we reject psychoanalysis or embrace it, that's a move that 20th century culture is built upon.
Freud famously described dreams as the royal road to the unconscious, and firmly believed that he had begun to unravel their full mystery. Nearly every creative thinker has been touched by the magic of dreams. Chagall and Magritte painted dreamlike visions. Salvador Dali cited Freud's interpretation of dreams specifically as inspiration for his surrealistic paintings. Dali also designed the famous dream sequence in Alfred Hitchcock's movie about psychoanalysis, Spellbound.
I can't make out just what sort of a place it was. It seemed to be a gambling house. But there weren't any walls, just a lot of curtains with eyes painted on them. A man was walking around with a large pair of scissors cutting all the drapes in half. And then a girl came in with hardly anything on and started walking around the gambling room, kissing everybody. She came to my table first.
Did you recognize this kissing bug?
Well, I'm afraid she looked a little like Constance.
Uh-huh. This is plain, ordinary, wishful dreaming.
Freud himself was anything but ordinary. After working in Paris with the famous neurologist and hypnotist Charcot, Freud returned to Vienna to lecture the medical society on his newfound knowledge. He dramatically proclaimed that neuroses were psychological rather than physical. The audience was skeptical, but Freud was nothing if not sure of himself.
Successful people are very convinced of their own correctness. They're monothemanic and megalomanic. Genius is not balanced. Genius has to be committed to the goal. So they don't necessarily come off as the boy next door.
The arrogant and contentious Freud dismissed criticism, giving it the psychoanalytic term resistance, which he claimed proved he was right.
Freud had this funny personality where he took disappointment as a sign of his own great ideas. That is, there's no success like failure, you know? I mean, if people don't understand me, it must be because I'm on the right track. Since people are so wrong-headed, since their methods are so bad, since they're so prejudiced, the fact that they don't like me means that I must be on the right track.
I was standing in a garden. The snakes were...
Freud's work on dreams began in 1887 when he was seeing a number of young women who suffered from what was then called hysteria, a puzzling complex of symptoms that ranged from aches and twitches to complete paralysis. He grew to believe his patients' symptoms were elaborate defenses against the pain of long-forgotten psychic shocks. Freud treated them, unsuccessfully, with hypnosis. But when patients spontaneously began describing their dreams, he was intrigued. Eventually, Freud became convinced of the role that dreams could play in revealing hidden trauma.
He brought me a box.
What was in the box?
I was very much afraid to open it.
When Freud and a patient were working together to interpret a dream, he asked the patient what the patient could remember, which is called the manifest content of the dream. He then asked the patient to sort of associate to each of the elements of the dream, and that simply meant to say everything that came to mind in connection with both the dream as a whole and to each particular detail of the dream.
Freud's ongoing work with free association reinforced his belief that the source of neuroses sprang from emotional damage caused in early childhood. This was a subversive idea, and Freud was left nearly isolated in his profession for 15 years. Finally, the ambitious doctor's persistence paid off, appropriately enough, in a dream.
The Irma dream is the classical dream. It's the so-called dream specimen of psychoanalysis. It's the dream that Freud had on, I believe it's the night of July 23rd, 1895, that he used as the basis to illustrate his interpretive method in the interpretation of dreams.
In his dream, Freud attends a family party where he sees Irma, one of his patients. Irma has been on Freud's mind since her therapy had stalled and she had left for her country estate. The day before, Freud's family doctor, Otto, had told him Irma was not completely cured. The oversensitive Freud resented the criticism. At the party, Irma complains of terrible pains in her throat and stomach. Freud scolds her for quitting therapy and proceeds to examine her throat. He discovers a peculiar growth on the walls of her mouth and calls upon a colleague for a second opinion. In the dream, Freud realizes that the cause of Irma's suffering was a careless injection given by Otto, who had neglected to use a clean needle. Freud's dream struck him as terribly revealing. The dream was an act of revenge against Otto for maligning Freud's ability, against Irma for resisting his analysis. He proposed a general law. The dream is a wish fulfillment. It was this revelation that inspired Freud to write The Interpretation of Dreams. The book was published in 1899, but Freud requested that the publication date be given as 1900 to create the impression that his views were pioneering thoughts for the new century. Freud's epic was ignored by disapproving colleagues and seemed only eccentric food for a handful of readers. The book sold merely 350 copies in its first 6 years. Freud was characteristically defensive.
I had dared, against the objections of severe science, to take the part of the ancients and of superstition.
In the book, Freud notes that amid the kaleidoscope of unique dreams are a handful that occur to almost all dreamers. Dreams of falling, being chased, soaring through the air and failing exams are common to the human experience.